All right. Junior scholars. All right. Come on, really, Millie Rock, come through. All right, so I need all your attention. Let's bring it center, focus. Focus. Thank you, Cherie. Everyone give it up for Cherie. She just worked so hard. You gotta respect that. All right, guys. What are we doing today? I don't know. Did you read my agenda? What are we doing? What is it? We're gonna talk with the author. Who's the author? What's the book? All right, so here's what I need from all of you to do right now. So right now, all of your phones are put away on silence. I will allow you to take photographs and things like that, but for now, please put your phones away. So we've had a great time so far reading this book, Engaging with Democracy in Black, and we're very fortunate today to have Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. here to talk to you all about the text, answer your questions. It may be about the book, but I want to encourage you to really pay attention and think about the questions you want to ask, because the first part of the afternoon, they're going to do a moderated Q&A, right, with our, who read the agenda? Who are our moderators? Ms. Dena Dupree and Solomon Mussing. Okay, that's your best friend. They're my best friends too. All right, so I want you to be attentive and give respect to your peers who are going to be on stage. They're also a little bit nervous, but they're very excited, and they have a great conversation in store for you. But I also want you to give it up for Dr. Glaude, who came from New Jersey. I mean, it's not like he came all the way from New Jersey, but he came from New Jersey, which is kind of far. I'm from Brooklyn, so it's kind of far. All right, and so I would like to introduce to the stage our amazing, wait for quiet, there we go. You're comfortable, I like it. Our amazing students, moderators, Dena Dupree and Solomon Mussing, come on down. And Princeton professor, Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. Give it up. Woo. I'll leave it to you.
All right, how y'all doing?
Y'all all right?
Where's the energy? How y'all doing? All right, so I'm gonna get it started. I'm gonna start off with the first question. Eddie, are you ready?
I'm ready. How y'all doing? Y'all good? Yeah. It's great to be here. It's great to be in this historic space with you guys. So, okay.
Okay, so I'm familiar, and I'm aware that you are familiar with the work of John Dewey. So what has inspired you to study religion and African American studies?
You know, that's a great question. I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank you guys for coming out on this frigid day. It's cold out here, so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to dialogue with you. I fell into religion by accident.
Really?
Yeah, I was in a PhD program at Temple in African American Studies. And I wasn't very happy there for a variety of reasons. And I went to a conference at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I was delivering a talk, and Cornel West was in the audience. And he heard me give the talk, and I was fighting and arguing with these other scholars, and he said, okay, I want you to come to Princeton and check me out for a little bit. And I said, sure, I'll drive up. And I went to a class that he was teaching with Nell Painter at the time, which was the first graduate course in African American Studies at Princeton. And he said, I want you to come study with me. And I didn't know what department he was in. I didn't know what he did, because I majored in political science and religion, majored in political science and philosophy at Morehouse. And I'm a Morehouse man, by the way. And so he said, I want you to come study with me. So I said, okay. And he was in a religion department. And so I wound up applying to a religion department, a PhD program in the religion department. And Cornel West and Jeffrey Stout, and this is the place where Richard Rorty, the late Richard Rorty, had a really big influence, and he was a philosophical pragmatist. And all of this was kind of in the air. And so Cornell was writing The American Evasion of Philosophy, a genealogy of pragmatism at the time. And that's how I came to Dewey, arguing with him, thinking that he got him wrong. And I wanted to prove to him that his reading of Dewey was wrong. And so that's how I came to it. That's a long-winded answer. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay.
So, on the subject of churches, in Democracy in Black, you kind of describe how Black spaces, including churches, inform Black culture. You talk about the positive benefits of having those spaces. I wanted to ask you a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that these spaces should remain inclusive or exclusive? And how does that affect your whole Black philosophy as well as the integrity of Blackness?
I think Black churches have always been
Just Black spaces in general.
Black spaces. I think Black spaces are a result of the ongoing aftermath of the evil of slavery in this country. Mm-hmm. Right? That this country has been deeply and profoundly segregated since its formation. And those spaces have been cultivated for a variety of reasons to respond to that environment, but they're not reducible to that environment. And they've always been spaces, I think, that reflect the best of who we are as human beings, and of course, in some instances, the worst of who we are as human beings. So, to my mind, they have a value, intrinsic value, right? Irrespective of whether or not segregation still obtains. Does that make sense? Irrespective of whether or not segregation or white supremacy still obtains, Black churches, Black colleges, Black cultural spaces still matter, right? For a variety of reasons, and we could talk about it. Folks aren't saying, do we still need, Italian-specific X or, Polish-specific Y, right? No. These are kind of cultural expressions, ethnic expressions in interesting sorts of ways. And so I think there's a way in which we can account for the institutional life of Black America as part of the kind of cultural vibrancy of the country. And then there's this kind of political work that these cultural spaces do, right? I know for a fact I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for those cultural spaces, right? Because they kind of provided protection against the headwinds, right, of a society committed to white supremacy or a society committed to the value gap, right? I walked into Morehouse from Mississippi, and I did not confront at Morehouse the belief that I was less valued than anybody. In fact, I confronted the opposite, the exact opposite, right? And those spaces aren't, by definition, exclusive, right? They're open, although they have their limitations in interesting sorts of ways, right? But I think they're absolutely valuable, especially in this moment, right? When so much is coming at us, right? And Black institutional life, as I argue in the book, is in trouble.
But you don't think it's a problem if they were more diverse? Like if, let's say, Morehouse was still an HBCU, but somehow it had this huge influx of just white students. Like would that?
It would change the fabric and character of the school in a certain sort of way. One would have to ask the motivation for why that would be the case. Mm-hmm. But I still hold the view that Morehouse and Spelman and Howard and Tuskegee and Alabama A&M and those places, they have open admissions, and they've always had open admissions. Folks just haven't applied. But now you have the point where, because they're struggling with keeping their doors open, that they're actively recruiting outside of Black communities, and I find that to be odd for a variety of reasons, but we could talk about that.
Since you mentioned Dr. Cornel West introducing
man.
you to, welcoming you to Princeton,
Right.
I have to know, what are your thoughts?
You gonna ask me that question?
Of course I am. Come on now. What are your thoughts on the situation going on in the media between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Dr. Cornel West?
Well, let me just be very clear up front. Dr. West is my boy,
Right.
my man, and I knew what he was going to say. I actually agree with the argument.
Okay.
I think the format didn't allow him to make good on the arguments.
Do you think you can specify it for people who aren't aware
So
of?
this is this argument between, Dr. West wrote a piece in The Guardian critiquing Ta-Nehisi Coates. And he basically called him a neoliberal kind of black intellectual. And neoliberal here registers not just simply economic philosophy, but that in effect that he is the darling of a particular class of folks precisely because he's not critiquing empire, he's not critiquing class, he's not getting to the heart of the contradictions of the country. In some ways, what motivates that piece is West asking, why Coates, why now, right? And then you read the work, and you got to ask yourself some questions. Now, what Cornell has to then encounter is folks accusing him of acting in bad faith, that really he just wants to be the black intellectual, and Coates has come along and displaced him and the like, right? But I think at the heart of the critique of Coates is this, for some of you who've read him, is that there's an absence of attention to black resistance in his work. So if you read Between the World and Me, which many of you probably have read, it's a letter to his son.
Right.
And it's a letter to his son in a moment when black young folk like you are in the streets challenging, right, white supremacy at every turn, challenging police brutality at every turn. But Coates made an editorial choice not to include it in the book, right, as a resource for his son, right? He didn't invoke what was happening in Ferguson. He didn't invoke what was happening in Baltimore. He didn't invoke what Black Youth Project 100 was doing, right? Black Lives Matter was doing. He didn't invoke that as a kind of resource for his son to imagine himself as an agent in the world capable of pushing back against white supremacy. White supremacy functions for Coates almost like oxygen. And see, I come from a tradition where making do is not the goal. You know, you make do in order to situate yourself to do something else. Right? We making do by by eating red beans and rice only with no meat. But that's only to keep us going. Red beans and rice isn't the goal. So making do isn't sufficient. So West is like, where is the fight back? How do we fight back against, white supremacy in this country? What is the tradition out of which you come, which calls attention to our ability to fight back, right? And the reason, and that it bothers him, because what happens, and it bothers me, because what happens when you don't talk about or emphasize fight back or black resistance, you can then justify us just trying to get paid on our own, just trying to take our basic strategy. And if you read Between the World and Me, what does he say to his son at the end? Basically says, get yours, ask questions, right? Keep your family close and friends close, right? You kind of say, well, whoa, what kind of social vision is that? What kind of justice vision is that? What kind of world are you positing? You just can't ask questions. That's what 2-year-olds do. Why? Right? You need a prepositional phrase to follow the question, right? For what, right? What are we doing this for? Why are we struggling? It's not just struggle. You struggle for what? For what ends? For what purposes? For a more just world. And the thing is that there are these other pieces that Coates points to that suggest that he's thought about this, but he's making editorial choices in both books, because in both books it's absent. You see? But it's just the way in which West dropped the critique, that gets him in trouble. But Coates has this kind of, I'm gonna say this in here, and y'all can yell at me, I don't care. Coates got this kind of armor around him that you can't touch him. It's almost just like Obama. You can't touch him either. It's almost as if like they're caught between these aspirational, we're so desperate on the one hand that we're just excited that somebody's making it. And then we're so aspirational on the other hand, we're strategic. I can't critique him because I want to get on like that. You see? So between the desperation and the aspiration, you can't say nothing critical about either one of them. And I don't believe in that.
I respect it.
So just like you're able to do with Ta-Nehisi Coates and Cornel West, throughout Democracy in Black, you maintain this very clinical, objective point of view, specifically in that chapter where you critique Black liberalism, conservatism. I wanted to ask, what experiences in your life have kind of forced you to like adapt this like objective point? Like what made you, why are you not a neoliberal? Like why are you not Ta-Nehisi Coates? And do you think like the discourse between those points of views is productive? Or like, is that an effective way of dismantling white supremacy? Does it get in the way?
That's a great question, Doc. That's a great, y'all something else. So it's, the conversation is absolutely necessary. I think it has value, right? And I don't want to reduce the conversation to people hating on other folks. I think the debate matters because it matters for everyday ordinary people who are catching hell in this moment. For me, we're always confronted with taking the bribe. So y'all are brilliant. Right? You're gonna have avenues in front of you that will allow you to move into spaces where you can take care of yourself and your family. Motivation is my main motivation. I ain't be able to take care of my mom. My mama protected me as I was going on. My mom protected me as I was. So now I can find my mama anywhere. So now I can find my mom. Take care of me. You need something, I got you. You want some take care of my. You need something, I got you. You want some take my mama. I got it, right? And I busted my behind to get to that. And I busted my behind to get to that position so I can take care of baby, my people. But at every turn, at every moment of success, at every turn, at any moment of success, you're going to, it's going to stop to your character. It's going to look into your character. Achieve this, now you can come. Now look, you're going to achieve that. Now you can come achieve this, but you're going to have to muffle and mute your voice. You have to muffle and mute your voice. You can't speak in certain ways on certain issues. The darling of the status quo in this instance, are you right this route where you can have your nice car, your nice watch, your nice suit, your nice house. You can take, but you can't speak. You can't speak your mind. You can't speak the truth. You can't step out there, right, and call what you see, right, and be courageous about it. Take the risk, right. And so for me, because I cut my teeth in the Black nationalist tradition, put my political teeth in the Black nationalist tradition, I've always decided that I was going to be that dude who would stand courageously, right, and with dignity in the face of injustice. Because as I was saying in the back room, what motivates everything I do is, outside of my professional work, is or my politics at least, what motivates my politics is what's best for the most vulnerable, for the people catching the most hate. That drives everything I do. That drives everything. And if I find that my self-interest contradicts that, I'm going to side with that every single time. And so for 8 years, because I was critical of Obama, nobody knew. Nobody did. You didn't see me on television. You didn't see that dude. I was in the woodshed doing my work. But the same thing I said 8 years ago, I'm saying. But the same thing I said 8 years ago, I'm saying now. It's not because, right? And it's not so because at the heart of my at the heart of my disagreement. And in this moment, I'm coaching others. In this moment, I'm constantly asking, what are your politics? The people doing black people in, right? Because the people doing black people in, black people, the people who are doing poor people who are doing black people in, the people who are doing poor people in, they're not all white, aren't necessarily. They're not all white. I'm cold. Feel me? I'm cold. The people who are doing that sin aren't all. They're not just white people. So you remember they say all our skin folk ain't all our kinfolk ain't our,
Right.
Those, what's the phrase?
It's like all our kinfolk.
All our skin folk ain't our kinfolk,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So there are people out here, and this is what I was trying to do in that chapter. There are some folks out here who got money, who are black, who are invested in policies that will benefit their self-interest. There are folks out here who claim to be leaders of black folk, who are more interested in being leaders of black folk than actually addressing the conditions of black folk. Right? And you just got to say it, and then you get hit. And then you say, well, I got a job at Princeton. I'm good.
Yeah.
I can speak my truth.
One of your recent tweets, you stated,
oh, Lord.
I know. I went on Twitter. I went everywhere. Come on now. Come on. I went on Twitter. I went on your Twitter. You stated, I'm going to take a little break from Twitter. Got to replenish and prepare for the next phase in our struggle. Have a wonderful and blessed holiday on December 22nd, 2017. Yeah. Can you elaborate or explain to the audience what you are anticipating and why you feel the need to take a break from social media.
So Twitter can be exhausting.
All social media.
All social media
social
can be
media.
exhausting. You know, every nanosecond, somebody's outraged about something.
Right.
And then Twitter functions like micro reality shows. Mm-hmm. You know, so you know everybody's business, right? Like this. And then you see everybody throwing shade, and you're like, damn. And you see it, and then, you know, and it's just, and I was reading over and over again all of this stuff all this venom that was coming at my boy Cornell, mm-hmm. by people who I know that Cornell put on, right? So, or that he's helped, or people who were going at him who hadn't read it, or who were attributing bad intentions to him. And then you combine that with the stuff around Trump, and I'm in Trump world 24 hours a day, 24/7, 365, because of the stuff I do with television. And so I was constantly finding myself just having to grapple with and encounter the struggle with stupidity. And as an intellectual, you know, you gotta find some spaces of solitude so you can do some thinking. And as a person who wants to always be self-reflective, you gotta have moments of silence where you can be still, so you can be critical of your own voice, so you're not getting enamored with hearing your own sound. Right? You gotta be able to shut up so that you can hear the chordal combinations, so that you can improvise better, right? But if you're constantly running your mouth, you can't figure out anything, right? So I wanted to be still and be quiet, the right spirit, right? And people will render it in this kind of therapeutic language of self-care, but if we don't tend to ourselves in these moments, right, this toxic stuff can get into your bloodstream and can really do some damage physically as well as mentally. So I said, well, let me take a step back. I was home in Mississippi. I was eating some gumbo. I was drinking some Jameson, but y'all don't know anything about that. I was enjoying my mother and father. They had their 50th anniversary. You know, my mom turned 70. That gives you an idea that they started young. I saw respite from the nonsense. And so then I found myself coming out of it, right, ready to roll. And then the first day I came out, you know, all hell broke loose in Trump world again, right? Trump tweeting about Rocket Man and my button is bigger than your button. Right, what's this? And then on top of that, dealing with the data, you know, the data in my head, you know, that black wealth mid-21st century will be at 0%, black median income, dealing with the reality of what happened in Troy, Alabama, where, you know, another black young teenager beaten senselessly by the police, dealing with the realities of that this struggle for justice is a long distance run, it's not a sprint, right? And it damn sure isn't a Twitter commercial, you know, so that's what motivated it.
So when we're talking about like the goal, like I'm curious as what happens to blackness culturally and economically once whiteness has no comparison of whiteness to blackness in a binary to give whiteness power? Like, what does that look like in a post-racial society?
You know, this is a hard question, and Jimmy was grappling with this. James Baldwin, I'm writing a book on Baldwin now. He's grappling with this in The Evidence of Things Not Seen. His last book about the Atlanta child murders, right? And he's grappling with the fact that these babies were killed in Atlanta. Right? All of these black children were killed in Atlanta, and supposedly by a black man. The context of a black woman is grappling with the reality of how the logic of the value gap, how the logic of white supremacy still obtains even when you have black people all in the room. Right? So, you know, I'm fond of saying that, you know, white folks ain't the only reason why black people ain't free. You see? And so this question of rethinking whiteness, of really uprooting this belief that because you're white, that somehow your life is valued more than others. Uprooting that is much more than just simply, you know, putting black faces in high places. It constitutes a deep cultural shift in the psyche of the nation, right? A deep shift in the psyche of the nation. So what will happen in that moment that you're alluding to is that we will see that justice work will continue because there will still be those who will want to seek power to benefit themselves and the powerful, and to do so on the backs of the most vulnerable. So even in that moment, when whiteness is not doing the work that it has historically done, if the motivation is to always keep track of the least of these, then you still have work to do.
But I'm asking, like, would there be a black culture if there isn't a whiteness? Like,
Of course.
do you think that the whiteness defines blackness in any way?
No, that's a phenomenon. I think that's blackness is the artifice of whiteness, and whiteness is the artifice of blackness. I think the phenomenon, Frantz Fanon makes a move like that in Black Skin, White Mask, and in The Wretched of the Earth. But I think, for me, what will happen is that blackness will register like ethnicity registers, right? So it's not as if black culture is contingent upon, right, the category of whiteness, right? It comes into being as a response to the negation, right? Somebody says, nigga, you say, no, I'm not. But the content you give to no, I'm not is not contingent upon the negation of the negation. So the fact that somebody calls you the N-word and then you say, no, I'm not, I'm this, and then you begin to articulate what this is, that isn't reducible to the initial moment of violence. You see what I mean? So the moment in which these folks said that we were less than, that we weren't human, and then we sang a song. We put a note into the world. We built a blues scale based upon the most unstable chords you could imagine. Right? We stylized space and time by simply the way we walked, by the way in which we, right, inhabited space itself. We built a culture that was predicated upon how we dressed, how we talked. The language that emerged out of that experience is not reducible to it. Right? It still has value, still has power. And the moment in which we think our lives are contingent upon, right, white folks is the moment in which we still caught and captured. This is the beauty of the late Jimmy Baldwin. He was trying to work through something. He said, we have yet, in Fire Next Time, he says, we have yet to find a language, I'm paraphrasing here, to even come close to approximating the Negro experience. And then he started thinking through, right, the ways in which we talk, the ways in which we communicate, Black English, right? Thinking about Black culture as this way of thinking about what it means to be human, right? And that's not reducible, right, to racism, right? Bless you. I mean, how can you think about this? You go into a Black barbershop, or you go into certain Black cultural spaces, ain't nobody thinking about white people.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's not like we're walking around obsessed with white folks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's sometimes when we imagine a politics that's predicated upon an obsession with white folks that we lose sight of our genius because we're obsessed with them, right? When in fact, as Jimmy would say, excuse my language, we need to ask the question, who's really the nigga here? Because I'm not that. The question is, why did you need it? And until you answer that question, why you needed the nigga in the first place, we will find ourselves on this racial hamster wheel. So I'm not obsessed with white folks by any stretch of the imagination. When I'm listening to Buju Banton, I'm not obsessing with white folks. Right? When I'm listening to Midnight, or I'm listening to Curtis Mayfield, or I'm sitting here smoking a cigar, hanging out with my friends, playing. I'm not obsessing with them. No. When folks are in church and that preacher's doing what that preacher can do, and folks are catching the spirit, I'm not obsessing with white folks. Oh, I wonder what white folks think. No. So part of a kind of political maturity is to begin to understand the power of who we are, irrespective of that gaze, right? That we can actually be, right? Without needing or requiring that recognition, you know what I mean? Because you get it elsewhere. That's me preaching, sorry.
No, that's perfect.
Well, I'm sorry.
Preach to the choir.
It's a choir.
What advice can you give to the young people listening on steps they need to take to not letting the beliefs or thoughts of others hinder their actions or words?
That's a hard question to answer. I mean, I think
or any like personal experiences you've had that you can kind of tell them, like, oh, I had to get through this obstacle, but I had told myself this. This was the advice I gave to myself.
One of the most amazing things one of the most amazing gifts that I ever received was from the man that I'm deathly afraid of. So my dad could just look at me, could give me a look, and I would shudder because I didn't know what was going to happen. I grew up in a household where I wish my parents, they've been married 50 years, but I wish they had gotten divorced. Because it was just that much, he came into the house, everything, all happiness, joy just left the house as soon as he came home from work. Damn. You didn't know what kind of mood he was in. You didn't know how, and I was the crier. And my brother used to get mad at me, right? Because when he would go off, he would start yelling at me because he knew I would be the one listening, taking it in, and I would break down eventually. So I grew up with this deep-seated fear in my spirit from this man. And one time I was in the 4th grade at Miss Davis, I remember Miss Davis. She kept messing with me. And I was in advanced classes all throughout. So I was only like one of 3 black people throughout my entire education, right? And she kept messing with me. And I said, "You're a racist," and walked out the room. And I thought I was going to get killed when I got home. I thought this angry man was going to just take it out on me. And he said, "What'd she say?" And I told him. He said, "If anybody ever says anything like that to you, you do the same thing. You don't let anybody, right, take your spirit, right?" And so one of the things that my father put in me was this insistence on my own self-regard, this insistence that wherever I am, I'm supposed to be. And then when I got to Morehouse, that was given shape in this way, right? That this is a canvas to create art. That my life, right, is mine to offer something unique to the world. And that requires taking myself seriously and not allowing anyone else, whether it was my boys on the block who were smoking doobies and drinking 40s, or whether it was the teacher who didn't want to give me the credit that I deserved, or whether it was family who dreamed too small and who didn't understand my own dreams. In other words, understand that the world actively conspires to make you small. The world actively conspires to make you small. You're growing up in the most cosmopolitan city in the world, and it conspires to make you small. And then the question becomes, how am I not complicit in that? How do I not become complicit in the world trying to make me small? So I'm always dreaming big dreams. I'm always imagining myself, right, in the grandest possible terms. I'm always thinking about this canvas to create. And that started from that moment where I was this frightful little kid, right? And my dad, who still can give me that look, right? Although I can say I'm paying some bills now. Chill, right? He could still give me that look, and it could throw me back in them. But there's something he gave me in addition to that, right? Was this kind of sense that I'm in control of this. Nobody else, right? And to do as much as I can to equip myself to leave my distinctive mark on the world, right? Because at the heart of a certain kind of racist practice, y'all, is that they want to treat us as if we're some homogeneous blob. Right? As if we're substitutable, that you ain't no different than you and you're not any different than. But the moment we insist on a kind of individuality, a kind of purposefulness, right? A kind of distinctiveness, a uniqueness in the service of a better world, then, as Jimmy would say, we're stepping outside of the orbit of their expectations, and that's revolution. You see? The moment we step outside of the expectations, not only of white folks, but the expectations of folk who seek to limit us, Right? It's the moment we're on the road to really creating a better world, to my mind. So the advice is to take yourselves seriously and to imagine yourselves in the broadest, most expansive terms. Don't let anybody limit you. Don't let anybody limit what you can imagine for yourself and for the world we inhabit. Don't let anybody do, not even your mama. You got to dream for her sometimes.
So when we're talking about Black success and what has like been in your way in terms of like stereotypes, I'm curious, do you believe in labeling of anything as Black success? Do you think it's destructive or constructive? Like, if we were going to talk about you being a Princeton professor, like if someone calls you a Black Princeton professor, it's like it's implying that your Blackness and your professorness disagree, or that one excludes the other. But if we were to call you a Princeton professor, we'd not be acknowledging something that affects your life hugely. Do you believe that when we call something that's Blackness, like that's Black success, if we were to make something Black, is that positive?
Yeah, for me, I'm a Black man. So I'm a Black professor at Princeton. I'm good with that. Right? I'm good with that. My daddy couldn't go to Princeton. I'm an affirmative action baby, yes. Why? Because you wouldn't let my dad in here, right? I don't care. None of that stick doesn't move me, right? No, not at all, not at all. I am so unabashedly tied to the success of who I am as a Black man, as an African-American man. But at the same time, the library of the universe is mine. I got the keys to it. And the condition for me to enter it is not to leave the specificity of who I am at the door. This is the thing. They always, it's almost as if in order for you to enter into the world, you got to leave who you are at the door.
You don't.
No, you don't. When Cornel West retired, we threw a major party for him, and we invited Parliament Funkadelic. We invited George Clinton because he loved George Clinton, and we invited the entire Princeton community to come, and they didn't know what the hell to do. George Clinton said, "We're going to turn it out, Professor West. We're about to," and everybody was up in that joint, and we were unashamedly who we are. Didn't care. We were free. Free. You see what I mean? So I'm free enough as a Black man to be very comfortable in being a Black professor at Princeton.
But do you not think that in how people just look at you?
I don't give a damn. You see what I mean, son? Yeah. I don't care. Now, the reason why I can say that is because I'm tenured. You see, I'm not naive to power. The reason why I can say it is because I've gone through the hoops. I've written the work. I have an endowed professor I have an endowed chair at Princeton University.
So this is like, I don't say the word, but like privilege.
Of course, I work in a privileged space with resources. Okay. Right? I live, you have a better chance of getting in the MBA than you do of being an endowed professor at Princeton. That shows you statistically how rare someone or Professor Imani Perry or somebody like that, but how we just not giving power to that stuff, man. The price of that ticket has been paid. You see, the price of that ticket has been paid. What does it mean for you to walk free? That doesn't mean walk naive. That doesn't mean to be naive in how you walk. But you don't come to bow, you come to conquer, as Bob Marley would say. I don't come to bow. Right? No. The only thing you need I used to say this to in graduate school at Princeton after somebody went to the chair on me, said I was too aggressive. I said, the only thing you need to know about me is that I'm smarter than you. I don't need friends. I didn't come to Princeton to make friends. Mm-hmm. I came to Princeton to get trained. In the grand scheme of my life, Princeton's about this big. Mm-hmm. See, that's what they do. They try to flip it on you. They try to flip it on you. You get admitted to Harvard, and you're supposed to be thankful that you're at Harvard. In the grand scheme of your life, Harvard's about this big. If you're dreaming big, if you got an expansive sense of you, Harvard is just an instrument in your imagining of who you are. It's just a moment. See? They want you to think that somebody's doing you a favor when you're busting your behind right now so that you can get it. Right? So when you get there, you should be thankful. You hear? What? I should be thankful? You should be thankful you're not getting cussed out right now. I should be thankful, right? No. You got to flip the script. You got to. So what they want you to do is they want you to think that somebody, you should be grateful because somebody gave you an opportunity. That's what's wrong with the folk. Think about what's at the heart of the Colin Kaepernick response. These millionaires are taking a knee. They're making all of this money and they're taking a knee. They should be grateful. Grateful? They're at the height of their profession. Grateful to whom? For what? You see what I mean? So I'm not really concerned about that. So I'm a black Southern man teaching at Princeton University.
But do you admit that that does exist?
Of course.
That's an actual working prejudice.
Of course. And it puts stress on me and others because you have to come with your A game every day in these sorts of spaces. Because if you come out one day and you're not as sharp as you ordinarily are, then they can say, see, you don't belong here.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, so so it can put some stresses on you. But, I learned this from Cornell and others that, you got to figure out a way to make these spaces so that you can exist in them on your own terms. On your own terms. It's hard to do, but you can do it. It's a decidedly masculinist project, too. I can do it more easily because I'm a man. I understand that.
So to continue on your success, in 2009 you were awarded Princeton's President Award for Distinguished Teaching. Mm-hmm. As this award became a part of your success story or a part of your life, how did it feel to be awarded and what emotions were you experiencing in that time period?
I'm a teacher at heart. Mm-hmm. I'm a liberal arts professor at heart. That's why I went to Princeton. I started my career at Bowdoin College in Maine. They call them one of the little Ivies, but it's a little liberal arts college in Brunswick, Maine. And I love that intimacy and intensity, the intimate connection, the sense in which my excitement about ideas can have an impact in a classroom. And then to see students just take off and do their thing, So it was, this is my vocation, I'm not a preacher, I'm a teacher. So to have someone acknowledge the work I do in the classroom was pretty special. And I told my mom. I told you I was a mama's boy.
I'm just like, oh, okay. You talked about how in the last chapter of your book, you talked about separate people from different universities that you kind of were passing on, what protests were supposed to be, not only with Al Sharpton, but how younger people were gaining voices and that they were now going to facilitate what the Black protest or Black movement is going to be.
Yeah, this is the difference. If you think about it, I begin with some similar assumptions, going back to second question you asked. I begin with similar assumptions as Coates about white supremacy and the country. I actually make the argument that they've built the country true. But unlike Coates, the second half of the book is really about Black politics. Right? So the first part of the book is really kind of trying to give us a different understanding of how race works. Right? That it's not just simply about, intentional prejudice, right? It's about habit formation and dispositions that emerge from that. The second part of the book is then to give us some examples to diagnose what is the problem with Black politics and some examples of new forms. But in the paperback edition of the book, I return to those movements. And, it's not all roses. What I've seen, DeRay McKesson has emerged in a particular sort of way. He's no longer that figure that I was writing about in Democracy and Black. People have, he's been on the Tonight Show, and Netta has been on the cover of Essence, and Patrice Kahlurs and Opal Tometi, they've done spreads in Cosmo, I think. The pace of commercialization of that struggle, the pace of it was mind-blowing. BYP 100 has become It's a very complex kind of moment. Black Lives Matter has split into, into these different ideological factions, which is part and parcel of struggle. But what I was thinking about then and what I'm committed to now is that young folk are at the vanguard of this. And what we saw in Alabama, what we saw in Virginia, what we're going to see in Mississippi, young folk and young activists are at the heart of it, that are going to change the political landscape. And I think the powers that be know this. I have an unshakable faith in that. But we'll see. We'll see. We're going to go to some questions out here. Y'all going to have questions or no? Have I bored you to death? No. I'm sorry. Mics are in the back. Ask me anything, too. I don't mind. I'm sure. I can always say I don't have an answer, though. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I did my research.
I
did my research.
Come on, guys. We'll start over here.
I wouldn't even watch their TV.
Make sure you come on the sides. If the line is long on that side, come on the side.
Just be free.
Now, we've been reading your book since October.
Oh.
So they come into play.
All right. I'm ready, I think.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Devin.
Hi, Devin.
So I've been doing my research on you. I recently saw an interview that you did on Morning Joe, the panel, right? And you discussed how Obama failed blacks. And when you previously said that politicians need to help the people that go through the most hell, do you feel like Obama didn't do that?
No.
Elaborate.
Okay. So I thought President Obama could have been much more ambitious in his political agenda. And we coming out of his 8 years, and what we do know is that the wealth gap widened under his administration. Mm-hmm. We do know that the housing crisis was deeply racialized. Black people lost a level of wealth that we hadn't seen, in my view, since the collapse of the Freedmen's Bank in the early mid-19th century. And the Obama administration would never put forward a policy that would specifically address the racialized dimensions of the housing crisis. The fact that banks and mortgage companies were directing black and brown people to these exotic mortgages that would then get people like me, who didn't need to be in those exotic mortgages, and then wind up with ballooning mortgage monthly payments and losing their homes, which is at the source of the wealth. When you look at Obama on policing, if you ask yourself what followed from all of those commissions after Trayvon's murder and Mike Brown's murder, what actually substantively changed in the nature of policing outside of those commissions, you would find that not much significantly. You had the police decrees around Newark and in Cleveland and other places, but in terms of a national policing agenda, not much followed from that. So when you think about at the level of economics, at the level of criminal justice, not much followed from what happened from having him in office. And see, this is my thing. Obama used to say, I'm not the president of Black America, I'm president of all America. Mm-hmm. And I used to say, nobody asked you that. So when you passed the Lilly Ledbetter bill, which had everything to do with, gender equality, you didn't say you were the president, you weren't the president of women. You're the president of all of them. When you insisted on LGBTQ rights, you didn't say, I'm not the president of the LGBTQ community, I'm president of all of them. When we're asking you to address specific policies, we're asking you as a constituency that voted for you at 98%. Period. We're not asking you to be the president of Black America. We're asking you to address a constituency that helped you become the president of the United States. And so instead what we got was a lot of cultural performances so he could sing Al Green. Okay. So my argument was I needed substantive policy, but he was so afraid of being labeled the black president. He was so afraid of it that we actually didn't benefit. At least so I call him a confidence man.
I get you.
Okay.
I understand completely. I got you.
Okay.
In your other panel, right, you said, quote unquote, I quote, sorry, white America just elected an ill-informed racist. So I know you're talking about Donald Trump. That's obvious. So if you could compare the two from Obama's presidency to Donald Trump's presidency, what would you say?
No comparison. White folks lost their mind. I say, is it on the radio? I'll say it again. The country lost its mind in electing Donald Trump. And it lost its mind based upon three insecurities, right? Deep economic insecurity, which they blamed on black and brown people. We jumped the line, and now white working folks aren't making the kinds of money that they should be making. So deep economic insecurity. Another is demographic insecurity. In 2008, Barack Obama was the first president elected without the majority of white people voting for him. And then we know that the demographic shifts in the country are such that the browning of America has already happened politically. So there's a deep demographic insecurity. The debate around immigration has nothing to do with the rule of law. The debate around immigration has something to do with the browning of the nation. Right? There's a deep insecurity about whether or not white folks and white culture, whatever that means coming out of the mouth of Steve Bannon and others, right, still has a toehold in the country. And then the last is Donald Trump's deep insecurities. So Trump was, in fact, elected as, to my mind, the last gasp, right, of a particular way of imagining the country. James Baldwin wrote in a piece in Nobody Knows My Name, right, that what we're witnessing is the funeral of Western civilization. The question is how long and how expensive it will be. And Trump is just the latest instance of that.
So my last question, so would you agree on what people say? I mean, some people agree on the fact that the black race voted on Barack Obama because he was black, not knowing his intentions. So would you agree on that?
I think a lot of us, because a lot of us got really excited. I even got excited.
I did too.
About his election. But we green screen Obama. You know what I mean by green screening? So in television, you could put a green screen behind somebody and you could make them look like they were in New York, Japan. You can make them look like anything you want them to look like. So we green screened it. But Obama told us exactly who he was. And he's just a centrist liberal.
Okay.
Right, I mean, he's a centrist liberal. If you think about his economic policies, there's a reason why inequality widened under his administration. It widened. Now it's going to widen even more under the Trump administration. But Wall Street bounced back. Main Street didn't bounce back for real. I mean, it's just now bouncing back, quote unquote. So he is who he is. I think we got excited because we thought we turned a corner.
Yeah.
And what happened is that the country revealed what's really underneath. What's so beautiful about the current moment is that all of this stuff is explicit. The genie's out of the bottle. And we got a chance, and this is what's so beautiful about this moment, we got a chance to actually undo it all. If we're courageous enough. If we're courageous enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got one over here.
How you doing?
I'm all right, Doc. Thank you.
I'm Jabari.
Hi, Jabari.
And you mentioned that you study religion at Princeton. And I just wanted to ask you how you feel Christianity has been used to indoctrinate black people in the past and the present.
Well, in some instances, right, I wrote a piece that created a lot of controversy entitled "The Black Church is Dead." That kind of got me in a lot of trouble. I don't care. But all religions, right, have, for the most part, all of the major religions have played a complicated role in the exercise of power. There's nothing that's inherent to them as religions per se that lead to that, but whether it's Islam or whether it's Christianity or whether it's Judaism, there has been, talking about the religions of the book, there's been a kind of intimate relationship between those religions and the exercise of power. It is certainly the case for African Americans that conversion to Christianity in the context of the Second Great Awakening in this country was an important moment. It allowed us to imagine ourselves in different terms. The great theologian Howard Thurman said, "The slave dared to redeem the religion profaned in his midst." So Black Christianity is a refutation of the idolatry of white Christianity, and that adjective matters. Right? Because Black folk couldn't be buried in cemeteries. We couldn't take communion. We had to be in the nigger pews, as it were. There's a reason why America's religious life is as segregated as any part of the rest of the country. That's not to say that it's by definition, revolutionary or progressive, because people could be, easily committed to the belief that none of this will resolve itself in our lifetime, that it will require otherworldly forces, and they become passive. But there's nothing inherent in the religion that leads to that conclusion. So I don't hold the view that by definition Christianity socialized us into being slavish or complicit with the situation that we find ourselves.
But what about how Christianity was used to justify segregation and slavery?
Just as Christianity was used to justify revolution. You see what I mean? So on the one hand, it could be used to justify, the status quo and power arrangements. On the other hand, it could be used by Nat Turner. It could be used by Mariah Stewart. Right? It could be used by Denmark Vesey and others. Yeah. Right? It could be used by Martin King. It could be used by Malcolm X. It could be used by, a range of others. It could be used as a resource to invoke a different way of being in the world. Al Raboteau wrote this extraordinary book entitled Slave Religion, the Invisible Institution in Antebellum America. And he talked about the slave Mort, and the slave Mort was praying. And his slave master came up to him and said, "You will stop praying now." And he said, No. Let me finish praying. You may own my physical body, but God owns my soul. You may be the master here, but I have another master. And that gets read as otherworldly, but think about that as a revolutionary act in the context of slavery. You may be my master here, but I got another master. And then that oriented Mort in a particular sort of way to the world that he inhabited, created the conditions for the possibility of revolt and rebellion. So part of what I'm saying is, just as it could be used to justify oppression, just as you got white Christian evangelicals voting for Trump at 90+%, you got progressive white Christians and progressive Black Christians organizing to resist Trump in the name of the same Jesus. You see? It varies.
Thank you.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Tyler.
How you doing, Tyler?
I'm good. And so lately I've become familiar with the concept of transgenerational trauma, the idea that when somebody experiences something horrible and traumatic in their lives, the results of that traumatic experience stays within not only the person but also within the family.
Yeah.
And I've seen how that's affected Black people. All the evils that came out of the value gap, that come out of the value gap, have damaged us in a lot of ways. And I just want to know, do you have any kind of thoughts on how we as Black people can try to kind of heal and address that trauma?
It's real. There's no way that we can come out of this and be whole. There's no way. Look, there are people walking around right among you already who grew up. Cornel West jumped into a pool in Sacramento, California, when he was little. All the white people jumped out of the pool, and then they emptied the water right in front of him. Al Raboteau, the guy that I just cited, who wrote Slave Religion, which is the founding book of the field of African American religious history, he lost his father when he was a child in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, because his father dared to confront a store owner who disrespected his wife, and the store owner blew his brains out. Wow. Killed him. Al Raboteau is still walking around. My dad, to this day, will not eat at Ed's Drive-In. Ed's Drive-In has the best crinkle fries and chili cheeseburgers on the planet. He won't drive. He drives by it and cusses because it's a physical monument of a moment of humiliation. Right? You live in a world, right? We're thinking like racial segregation was in the 19th century, right? We're talking the last major piece of legislation passed to address racial segregation in this country was the Fair Housing Act in 1968, the year I was born. 12 years later, they tried to undo it with the election of Ronald Reagan, 1980, 12 years. So for all of these years, slavery, Jim Crow, post-Jim Crow reality, we had to raise our babies in this. We had to raise our babies. There's no way you can come out of that and not be harmed. There's no way that you can come out of that experience of a society organized along the lines of the value gap and not think that somehow you're not pretty. That you know, I got a little Indian in me. I used to tell Melissa Barrier, you know, I got a little Indian in me, so she know I'm not just black, right? Or I'm not as pretty as I should be, so I'm gonna try to make myself, right? You gotta come out, we come out of this wounded, scarred, bruised, broken. The question though, this is the thing, the object is not wholeness. You acknowledge the brokenness. This is what we gotta do. I'm answering your question, I'm long-winded, but hear me now. I want y'all to work with me on this one, see if you think I'm wrong. The problem is when we try to make ourselves whole. I'm broken. What Eddie Glaude Sr. did to me, it's in me. My baby son, my son had to deal with it. I raised him just like I was raised. He said I would blank out, just black out. And then all of a sudden I'm loving, after I black out, tell him how much I love him. That Negro graduated, ran away from home so quick because he didn't want to deal with me. It's in me. I'm broken. Now, what is it? The objective is not to somehow suddenly become whole. That's when you get all twisted. I'm not going to get rid of that wound that's right here. But what I'm going to do is try to make a different kind of life. Let's give you an example. Ella Natsui, the Ghanaian artist. I hope y'all got some of his images in the Schomburg. He has something called the Broken Pot series. And what he does is he takes these broken pots, things that look like they're no longer in use, you're supposed to discard them. And then he takes those broken pots and he makes something beautiful with them. The brokenness becomes the basis for a different articulation of who we are. Or think about old Japanese pottery, right? It's an old technique that when the sculpture breaks, they then fill the crack with gold. And then the broken pot becomes actually more valuable. It's not whole. So when we aspire for wholeness, is that we set ourselves an aspiration that we can't achieve. I'm broken, I admit it. I'm fallen, fragile, broken creature. But what I'm trying to do is imagine a life in which I can inhabit that, where as Cornell would say, right, where I'm a wounded healer and not a wounded herder. Y'all hear that? Yeah. Where I'm a wounded healer and not a wounded herder. And so how do we deal with that transgenerational trauma? We confront it head on, and we don't imagine ourselves putting it aside, but inhabiting it in such a way that we become better human beings in the world. You see? Mm-hmm. So now I'm chilling with my son. He taught me how to millie rock. Right? I'm chilling. He's at home now. Right? Chilling. He's playing Resident Evil, whatever the stuff. Y'all can't mess with that. I'm too scary. Right? But trying to build a relationship with him as a 21-year-old man who's about to graduate college. Right? How can we be better in the world? That's how we deal with it seems to me. Get rid of this aspiration of being whole. And instead understand that the wounds we carry, but we can be better. Not whole, but better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does that make sense? Yeah. I love that distinction. Wounded healer, wounded herder. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Autumn.
I didn't hear.
Autumn.
Hi, Autumn.
Hi. So one of the, I know you talk a lot about race in the book and stuff like that. So do you think that today in society, do you think we have a racial caste system?
A racial caste system?
Yes.
Yes.
Explain.
The way in which race and poverty work, people talk about it as the underclass. We can read Oliver Cox, and there's some troublesome formulations there, but there's a way in which the ability to get out of poverty in this country is almost statistically impossible, right? So they sell us a 649 when they talk about the American dream, because it is almost, our class structure is more rigid than the class structure in England. So if you're born in poverty, more than likely you will die in poverty, and your children will be in poverty, and their children will be in poverty. Right? And so there's a way in which the system is structured that has the characteristics of a caste, and particularly if you're poor, or you're poor and a person of color, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it is always important then for any, bless you, for any analysis of our current struggle to include an analysis of class. Right? So we can talk about race and white supremacy and the like, but we have to keep track of capital, right? And the way in which capital and markets presuppose disposable people. And what that means is that at least a large number of black people and brown people find themselves within the category of being disposable. So you need an analysis of race and class if we're going to really fundamentally change the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Claire.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. And I actually have 2 questions for you. The first one is, considering who you are now as an intellectual and going back on your life as a child, as a teenager in school, simply put it, what would you say to yourself? What advice would you say, personally, not just as any kid, but just you, how you felt about your father, for example, how you felt about family, about where you were, about what you were doing? What would you say to yourself? What advice would you give? What would you give to yourself?
That's a hard question. I would probably say don't bury it. Don't push it now. Right? Don't push it so far down.
And it being?
All of the wounds, the fears, it is a hard thing to confront the person that is you, right? And so I developed this capacity to turn my emotions off like a faucet, right? To be able to, in order to deal with what I was dealing with, I had to be able to I have this amazing capacity to compartmentalize things and to put them away. And so what I was doing, I was burying a lot of things. And it has an impact it has impacted how I navigate the world. I'm trying now to be more attuned to the emotional economy that I have, because I'm an intense dude. And that intensity can evidence itself in a number of different ways. I'm an extrovert, but I'm an introvert, if that makes sense.
I think it's called an ambivert.
So I'm much more comfortable in my study by myself, reading. I almost burned the house down when I was 10 years old. They couldn't find me. I was underneath my bed with a candle reading The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, and almost burned the house down, trying to hide from all of the noise and the nonsense. So if I could tell myself something back then, I was like, don't bury it, because what happens, it goes capillary. When I push it down, it's going to come out some kind of way. It's going to come out in that Glaude temper. My grandmother said, don't give Glaude men white liquor, they act like fools. Right? It's going to come out some kind of way. And see, the thing is, this is the thing. We've had this illusion that Claire, right?
Yes.
We've had this illusion that in order to be out in public, you had to be, you couldn't be broken and fragile. So you didn't know Jesse Jackson grew up in a house next door to his daddy who didn't recognize him as his son. So every day he would go out in the fence and look and see his father having breakfast with the family. Right? That sense of brokenness and wound that's at the heart of it. And it impacts how you lead. It impacts the tone. Right? It impacts the tone and timbre of your voice. So if I had I'd say don't bear it, be easy on yourself. But it took my mama to say, come back and talk to your daddy. Because I was having these nightmares where I was just messing him up. I mean, I was giving him 6 pieces, right? It wasn't 2. It was series combinations, And she was like, and I was a grown man. And she was like, and so I'm being open to you, right? Because we all walking around with these, because you think you're the only one dealing with what you're dealing with, right? And here I am, big time professor, right? And so she said, no, you got to come home and talk to your daddy. And I went home and he said, before I could open my mouth, he said, I don't ever remember being touched by my mama. My dad, I grew up on the coast of Mississippi. Everybody in my dad's family is light-skinned with green eyes. My dad is my color. And he was like, I asked my daddy, why was I so dark? He said, because we found you in a garbage can. So he was dealing with wound. You see? So then I had an account for him. So I would say be more gentle to myself. Maybe my wife wouldn't have to go through what she went through, and my son, what he had to go through.
And my second question is, you say to, I'm trying to remember, always imagine the greatest things, to always, don't put yourself down, think of the best thing that can possibly happen. And as going to Princeton as a student and eventually as a professor, what did you think that world and society would be? What in your mind, I guess, would be the ideal thing? What were you saying what basically did you think the world was going to be?
When I came to Princeton, I'd already been shaped by my experience at Morehouse. So I came to Princeton with the sole assumption that I needed this credential to do what I had been called to do in the world. I'm always engaged in this trying to figure out my vocation, trying to figure out why I'm on the planet to do what I do. And so I just came in and just wanted to take advantage of everything. And I realized when I stepped on campus that I wasn't prepared. I hadn't read most of the material that they were talking about. And so I had a moment of reckoning, right? Either I was going to fold like wet tissue paper or I wasn't going to sleep because I had to read. And so going back to Eddie Glaude Sr., I had the discipline, right? That discipline that he put in me to sit down and dedicate myself to the life of the mind, reading, get my reading done every day, and I still do it, get my reading done so I could become the kind of person or the kind of scholar that I imagined myself to be. There's this wonderful line in Ralph Waldo Emerson's work. He said, God speaks to us through our imaginations. Okay, isn't that beautiful? God speaks to us through our imaginations. And whenever I tell my students that, I say that if that's true, then what is the devil doing? So the thing is that if we imagine ourselves in these very limited ways, you see, you're done. Stick a fork in you. So I stepped onto Princeton's campus with this understanding of myself well beyond Princeton. And so if I don't have to be at Princeton to do what I'm doing.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yania.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yania.
Hi, Yania.
Hi. I just had a question about the intended audience. Who do you feel needed this knowledge? The young black youth, or alt-right members, or white liberals? Who did you write the book for, and
right.
Who do you feel in this day and age needs this knowledge?
That's a great question because we struggle with the audience and the tone of the book. And in some ways, the first half of the book is to the nation generally. The first part, the first section. And then once we get past Dr. King chapter, I'm talking to Black America in some ways, right? And I'm talking to Black America in that moment because I've always imagined our politics as in some ways central to the salvation of the country. What we do, how we do it, what we model is actually key. So it's both of those audiences, although black people are a part of America generally, because one of the things I wanted to do was to give us a different language. Usually when we say white supremacy to our colleagues, they get all unnerved. So I was like, let me find a word, a phrase that could do that work. It's like the value gap. So we talk about the achievement gap and the empathy gap, the value gap, and see if that can take traction, can get some traction. Racial habits, white fear, trying to offer language to account for the moment so that people could use it as a way of analyzing what we were experiencing at the time. And then trying to break through, right, the current stale form of black politics, right? Because I think the black political class in this country, right, is as culpable as any group for the hell that black people are catching. And to say that in such a way that it could open dialogue and not be seen as my own selfish desire to be the next HNIC. I have no interest in that, you know. So those are the audiences in the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey.
Hello, my name's Jason.
Hi, Jason.
So my question is, what can we do as a community or maybe as individuals to fight the system of white supremacy? And what is the ultimate goal, or what is like the ultimate goal of fighting back, at least in like your opinion?
That's a great question. So I can answer the first one. The ultimate goal is a more just society in which no matter your zip code, the color of your skin, who you love, where you live, you know, class, race, sexuality, gender, that you can not only dream dreams, but you can make those dreams a reality.
Do you think that's possible?
I have to. I got to bank my all on it that it's possible. Otherwise, I just become a drunk or a selfish asshole. I got to believe that's possible, you know? And then what can you do? What can you do? You got to align your passions with organization. So if you're committed to the question of criminal justice, find that organization and align your passion with that organization, and then begin to acquire the skills in order to contribute. If you're committed to Fight for 15, where you think a $15 minimum wage is what we should have, find that organization and align your passion with that organization. So align your passion with the organization. And second, commit yourself to the discipline of ongoing growth and critical examination, right? So we got to read. You got to be a reader and a thinker, right? You got to be you got to have cultivate that critical capacity, that critical, passionate intelligence, so that you can navigate this world in a way that's consistent with what you care most about. And all of that begins with taking yourself seriously. All of it begins there, taking who you are and what you imagine yourself to be seriously. Not so seriously that you can't laugh at yourself, but seriously enough that you know that you got to commit yourself to the stern discipline to make it a reality, right? And while everybody else is trying to be cool and doing all the things and laughing at you doing da-da-da, you're like, all right, you're going to peak in high school. I'm not. It's one of the strange, some of the adults around here know, one of the more disappointing things is to bump into that person who peaked in high school. They peaked, and that's all they could talk about is what they did in high school. You don't want to peak in high school. Oh, that's way too early. Don't peak in high school, right? This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Suna. Suna,
how are you?
I'm good. I'm well. How are you? So in your book, you critiqued President Obama a lot, and I definitely agree with a lot of things that you said. But how do you suppose that we as a people should strive towards a better democracy without the help of powerful politicians like President Obama? Because it doesn't seem like, you know, post-black politicians like him are slowing down. So.
Oh, that's a great question. I think it has something to do with local organizing. We have to flip the script. There's a way in which African-American politics has been defined, at least since the mid-20th century, as, you know, we're going to run somebody for the presidency of the United States, whether it's Shirley Chisholm jumped in there for a minute, and folk didn't like it because of the sexist nature of the Gary, Indiana Convention in '72. But you go run Jesse Jackson for president, for example, and everybody gets excited about him running, and then black folk will vote down ballot because we all turn out. Or Sharpton tried to do it, right? And then Obama did it. So we need to flip it. We don't need to be focused on running someone for national office. We need to actually focus at the local level. And that is, we need to understand that organized communities around DAs, think about what Color of Change has been doing. They have a super PAC where they're organized and they're funding candidates who are running, progressive candidates who are running for district attorneys. And those candidates are running for district attorney precisely because district attorneys are the ones who are indicting our children, who are indicting our community. So they know this is an important nodal point. Running progressive folks for city council, for school boards, but also understanding that elections are just one aspect of the democratic process, right? Organizing in order to push local government around zoning laws, organizing to push. So in other words, local politics, right? This is what was so beautiful about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to me, SNCC. Right? They went into these local communities and they organized and they found indigenous leadership within those local communities and they created the conditions under which that indigenous leadership could emerge to take control of their communities. As Miss Ella Baker, who's my political hero, says, we are the leaders we've been looking for. Right? In other words, the mature people, we don't need somebody to lead us. I'm tired of folks talking about the Moses. We don't need no Moses. Right? The Joshua generation, we need to lead. We're the leaders we've been looking for. And that's going to evidence itself right at the local level. So I actually urge a kind of shift in the political orientation, that we turn to the local and then network that local. All of us know that this thing right here, right, can connect us to someone in Oakland right now. What they're doing via media, we can organize and mobilize like this. So the local is not just local, it's global. Right? It's global in its implication if we organize properly, you see? And I think that's the way we move out of this thing. Because people actually believe that Obama was the fulfillment of Dr. King's vision. Who in the hell? It's like that moment when I was debating Mike Dyson on Democracy Now! And he tied our tradition to Hillary Clinton. And I was like, don't do that. I mean, I had to catch myself. Like, don't do that, right? So I think the local is the source. It's the space where we do this work, right? Because we done fell for that okie doke too many times. Right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Emma.
I'm just spitting. Go ahead.
Should white people be involved in conversations about race even if they feel uncomfortable? And if so, how do we instigate those conversations?
Absolutely. This is not just about us. Remember how I asked the question, the Jimmy question, who's the real nigga here? We got to answer the question, why did you need the nigga in the first place? Because I'm not a nigga. Bob Baldwin was trying in that moment to kind of get us to the heart of the psychosis, to take us to the heart of the psychosis that really threatens the nation. In the book, remember I said we need to do a couple of things, right? I said we have to change our view of government. And we change our view of government by changing our demand of government. We have to change what we ultimately value. Right? We can't have a society predicated upon the acquisition of material things. If we do so, we'll constantly vomit up the likes of Trump. Right? Our politics become better when we organize. We will produce better choices for ourselves when we're organized. And then that other point I made is that we got to change how we view white people. And the only way we can change how we view white people is that we have to kill the idea of white people. I have a lot of people who happen to be white that I love to death. You hear the distinction? I have a lot of people that happen to be white that I love to death. But the idea that one's identity is bound up with the notion of whiteness, right? What is that? I don't know what that is outside of domination. I don't know what that is outside of the value gap. Right? So we have to deconstruct this idea of whiteness that has organized our society in such a way that even spatially, the value gap obtains. Remember what I said in the book? You don't learn race just by simply people being intentionally racist. You learn race just by driving around New York. I mean, race is learned just by moving through space, right? So we have to begin to deconstruct this idea of white. And in order for that to happen, all of us are going to have to engage in that conversation. All of us are going to have to do that work. And it's going to be hard. It's not going to be a kumbaya moment. It can't be, can we all get along? right? It's going to have to be some serious truth-telling in the name of American democracy. And that's why I love Jimmy Baldwin, this small, black, gay man with his problems, wounded as he could be, right? Dared to speak truth to America because he loved it enough to speak the truth. So all of us got to engage in it. It can't just be a black discussion. And it can't be a discussion where my intent is to make white people feel guilty. Right? You need to repent. No, that's not useful. But I'm going to tell the truth, because that's the precondition for justice to emerge. If we're lying to ourselves, how the hell are we going to produce a just society if we keep lying to ourselves? Can't happen. Thank you.
My name is Kwame, and
Kwame?
Yeah, Kwame.
All right, Doc.
So you said in your book that America tends to idolize white figures throughout history, like Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and despite all the negative they've been associated with throughout history, and that kind of extends to like education, and how like schools tend to omit things to, like, let's say, just skip over certain questions. Mm-hmm. And what my question is that do you think the education system has the potential to be changed for the better, or does it need to be removed and replaced with something else that's more accurate initially?
I don't think we've ever, as a country, committed ourselves to educating all of our children. Period. I really don't. And that has evidenced itself in a number of different ways, in terms of how we fund public education, to the reason why parochial and private schools emerged. We could tell a story, right? I mean, my son went to Princeton Day School in Princeton University, in Princeton. And the reason Princeton Day School exists is because Princeton High School was desegregated. That's the only reason why it exists, is because the high school was desegregated. So I think so we have to tell ourselves a better story about our failure to fundamentally commit the nation to educating all of our children. That's the first thing. The second thing is that all schools, take on a socializing role. We don't tell ourselves a story about the radical dimensions of American democracy. So not only are we telling a skewed story of black history, we're telling a skewed story of American history. What would happen if we began the story of the country not at Plymouth Rock, right, but in Jamestown? Plymouth Rock gives us the story of pilgrims. Jamestown gives us the story of a corporation and slaves. What does it mean that America was a corporation before it became a nation? Right? What do those different beginnings suggest for how we tell the story? What would be the difference if you really told a story about the Shays' Rebellion? Right? How would this stuff like? So there's a radical tradition, a radical democratic tradition that we don't really discuss, but is available to us. I don't think we need to discard it. I think we just need to commit ourselves to educating all. And once that commitment evidences itself in all of its details, we'll see, I think, other collateral effects, if that makes sense. Thanks, Doc.
Thanks.
Y'all gonna answer some questions?
If you want us to jump in,
Y'all wanna help?
Nah.
You sure? You can help.
We'll jump in if we need to.
All right.
I mean, you're getting into it. You don't want to impose.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Doc.
Earlier you were touching on...
Get closer to the mic so I can hear you.
Earlier you were talking about what your ideal American society would be. And I just wanted to know, how do you think we could get that ideal American society with the foundations that America has? We're so deeply rooted in this, like, all these white dudes back then made what we have now, and that we've just went off of that. We haven't really started fresh. So other than starting fresh, do you think there's a way that we can change where we are now 400 years deep into this?
On my good days, like I said, I have to believe that. Right? On my bad days, you know, on my bad days, they seem to be more frequent than they have been. I don't think it becomes difficult to see, right? To see us being otherwise. One of the things, though, and keep going back to this stuff about imagination, we have to begin to imagine the as yet, in order to orient ourselves to it. So we're in a moment now of crisis with all of the Trumpism and Bannonism and the dysfunction of the current moment. And the danger of this is that we become nostalgic and long for what was. So we got Trump, and so then you say, oh, I wish we had the steady hand of Obama, or I wish we had Clinton, or I wish we had da-da-da. And then when we make that move, we lose sight of the contradictions and problems of the previous moment, right? Because we wax nostalgic for something in the past. When in fact, the moment offers us an opportunity to imagine what kind of society we want. Because all of it, we're in such chaos, right? So we have to be able to imagine a society that we want. So for the first, look, the majority of Americans want single payer. So we have an opportunity to reimagine our healthcare system. We have an opportunity to reimagine what constitutes the ceiling and the floor of our economy. So people are calling for, think about a democratic socialist, a self-avowed democratic socialist is one of the leading political voices in the country today. Right? That wasn't possible 8 years ago, even no matter what you think of Bernie Sanders, right? So in other words, I think we have an opportunity to do some vision dreaming. Some vision dreaming, irrespective of the obstacles. Feel me? Irrespective of what's on the ground. We just got to be able to say, this is what we want. And then once we give voice to it, figure out how to make it happen. But we can't even give voice to what we want because people are constantly invoking that it's not possible.
And you think when we do give the voice to what we want, our strength will be strong enough to fight this? Okay.
Yeah, because, when you vision dream, man, there are others who buy into it. And then you can organize when you vision dream. But if you're just kind of moving practically from one fire to the other, right, you're reacting. Right now, a lot of people are in reacting mode, waiting for the next stupid tweet from Donald Trump, waiting for the next ignorant thing the Republicans will do, waiting for the next spineless thing Democrats will do, right? Waiting for the next spineless thing Democrats will do, the next spineless thing the Democrats will do, right? We're just kind of waiting in reactive mode, when in fact we need to be in active mode. To use a football analogy, I'm not a read and react defensive guy. Hit the gaps, go, right? Fast break guy, right? Grab the rebound, go. Right? Don't hesitate, grab it, go, right? And I think this is what we need. This is what we need, but vision dreaming. What kind of society do we want? What kind of society do I want my baby's baby to grow up in? And don't tell me I can't dream that, because it's not possible. That's only not possible because you say it's not possible. Thank you, man, appreciate you. Yes?
Good afternoon, Dr. Glaude. My name is Xavier.
Doctor.
So I was wondering, in the book, you spend a lot of time talking about the ignorance of white people when it came to systemic poverty versus individual poverty. And I was wondering, in an alternate history where, let's say that white people did understand that, let's say decades prior to now, would that have changed the reality for black people in America today, do you feel? Or do you feel that we'd still be stuck in the same situation that we are right now?
It would be certainly a beginning, right? So I don't want to attribute, ignorance to as the source of our current reality. Remember, W.B. Du Bois, kind of the founding figure of black intellectual life, used to hold the view that it was ignorance that was at the heart of white supremacy. So he conducted the Atlanta studies and said, if we could provide a fuller picture of black life, then the ignorance of white racism will wane. And then he encountered Sam Hose's knuckles, right, in a display case in in a store. And Sam Hose was lynched and his body was burned. And people took relics from the lynching site, his knuckles, right, bones from, as his genitalia was cut off. And he said, this isn't about rationality. This isn't about ignorance. Right? There's something else here. So I think there's a willful ignorance, right, aimed at protecting innocence or perceived innocence that we have to get after. So I would not go as far as to say that if people knew the facts, that they would behave differently. I think some people are willfully ignorant of the facts, and it becomes very difficult to convince them otherwise. So it's not just simply about a reasoned argument. Something else has to happen. It has to happen at the level of culture, at the level of the psyche. So it would be a beginning, though, if there would be more people willing to concede, right? Because remember in the book, if people act like black folk, double-digit unemployment is as a result of black people being lazy, right? Even if black unemployment is at 6.8%, it's still twice that of white unemployment today. And why is that the case? It's not because black people are lazy. It has everything to do with a dual labor market that disproportionately impacted black folk. There's a reason why black wealth is the way it is. It's not because black folk don't save. It has something to do with the dual housing market. It has something to do with federal programs that help build the middle class in this country that systematically, right, excluded black people. It is not just because of it. So people are willfully ignorant of systemic reasons that undergird racial disparities in this country and inequality in this country. And to tell that truth doesn't necessarily mean that it will result in people acting more justly, because my experience suggests otherwise. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Isaiah. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X had very different beliefs on how society should work in regards to race. So which do you associate more with or not agree with, and which do you think was like a better option?
Well, let me just be upfront. My goatee is a result of a conversion experience I had after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Yeah, I read that.
Right, so I will never cut it off. I grew it right after I read it when I was 16 at Morehouse. I found a language for my dad's rage, and it's been here ever since. I was a youth minister in the Nation of Islam in Philadelphia in the top of the clock. So I was in the nation. It was only for 3 months, but I was trying to relive Malcolm's life because he's a hero in my head.
Right.
So it's not, for me, it's not a choice between the two. Dr. King's vision, and particularly post-63, the late Dr. King, who understood the interrelation between empire, racism, right, and class, right? So empire, racism, and capitalism. He understood that clearly. That's why when he was murdered, he was organizing garbage workers, right, in Memphis. And he was organizing a poor people's campaign, not just simply to engage in nonviolent action, but it was going to be bring all the poor people into D.C., and to establish a tent city, to sit in, to call attention to the need for the redistribution of wealth. So King understood the evils of capitalism, the evils of militarism, and the evils of racism. Right. That's why he got the bottom half of his face blown off at the Lorraine Hotel. Malcolm, there's a sense in which Malcolm's stance, his rhetorical stance, he says, stop sweet talking. Tell them what kind of hell you've been catching. And let them know if they're not ready to clean up their house. They shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down. There's a sense in which Malcolm's unadulterated rage and unquestioned love of black people is something that has taken root in me. And this is why I love Jimmy Baldwin, because Baldwin embodies both. Baldwin is rageful. The anger is always simmering. It's like the pressure cooker and you're cooking oxtails, right? My wife's Jamaican, so, right. Right, so you're cooking oxtail. Listen to, So the rage is always there. But the rage is always tempered by a powerful love, right? And so it's this balance within me, right? And I think, so it's not an either or choice for me, it's both and, right? I want to be vulnerable in public, I want to be angry in public, I want to be thoughtful in public, I want to do all of it in the service of a more just world, right? In other words, I want to be all too human in public. That makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good
My name is
afternoon.
Robert Williams, and my question to you today is, do you think it's offensive for blacks to use the N-word after knowing the history of the word?
Nah, I don't. I don't. People can choose, languages, I don't use it in my own personal. I think, I think Ta-Nehisi Coates gave the best example of this. If you go online, see, people think I wouldn't quote him because I'm so critical of him, and I don't care, right? I think he gave it a response to a white student at some university who asked about the N-word, and I thought it was a brilliant response. So if you can Google him and you see it, it's perfect. But I don't have any problem with people using the N-word in the context of their own social settings. It can kind of get grating. It can kind of grate on my ear after a while if everything is my come on, man, But I don't have a big issue with it. It actually shows a limit of language use, but it also shows the power of how we can take possession of something that was degrading and make it something endearing. It's like being among a bunch of sisters who call themselves X, or being in an LGBTQ community and hear how language is being used in this way and that way. It's just when folks who aren't part of those communities then think that they have license to use that language where the problem arises for me.
Thank you.
Sure. Hey!
Hi, my name is Nyla.
Hi, Nyla.
And my question is if this is one word that you would describe America in, and what would it be and why?
One word to describe America. Tragic. Tragic. And I say that in I say that in a way that, kind of harkens back to Greek tragedy, that harkens back to the theater. Right? There's something about a country that professes a commitment to democracy that is founded on Republican ideals, that have also, at the very moment of its articulation of those ideals, commits itself to the institution of enslaving other human beings. It's like John Adams, at least according to some stories, said to King George, "We will not be your Negroes." At the very moment in which he's giving voice to freedom, an idea of freedom, is predicated upon an intimate understanding of unfreedom. Can you imagine? He's trying to make an argument for freedom to King George, and he says, "We will not be your Negroes." It's fascinating. So I think it's tragic to the core. You're welcome.
Thank you. We both have questions and we're
Sure.
instructors, so we did rock, paper, scissors. I technically won, so.
But you both can ask them, right?
I know, but I'm just saying if you want to get long-winded on my question and take 2 seconds on his.
Okay, got
it. So I'm a journalist, and I went a couple of years ago when Ferguson happened, and they had the BET Talk Back. So they gathered a whole bunch of black people. You had thought leaders, you had people from Harvard, black, people.
Yeah.
They brought in the Ferguson protesters.
That's when TEFPO did that.
The Bloods.
Yeah.
They brought in all of these people. And as you can imagine, it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. We have black people from every type of demographic, economic, socioeconomic standing in one room. This is going to be great. So when the cameras rolled, it was amazing, right? You have all of these people. You have gang members. It looks amazing. They went to commercial. There was almost 25 fights in 1 hour because black people could not, it was, if you just pull up your pants, then we won't have this problem. Before we can address the situation, it was, if you stop using slang, if you stop using nigga, but from the people on the field who don't read your books and who don't go to, college and stuff. They were there. It was the mace in their eyes. They were there. They didn't see people like you. So that's always the gap. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like you're almost preaching to the choir, because you wrote a book. The people who are going to buy your book are probably sitting in college classes and stuff like that. But the people who are in these neighborhoods, that's the disconnect, because sometimes they're fighting and they don't all the way know how to eloquently say how they feel. And I think a lot of times it gets, they take it out of context when you put a camera in their face. You're not there talking on their behalf. It's them saying, I just don't want this to happen no more. It's crazy. I gotta do something. Because they don't know how to eloquently say, I feel like justice needs to be served when somebody dies that's Black. You know what I mean? So it's like a big disconnect, and I just want to know what's the remedy, because I'm not really focused on what white people got going on right now. My situation is Black people and try to get them in that room, and for us not to all hell break loose. Yeah. Because we're still fighting the good fight. But it's people, I want to say like you, who have that eloquence when you speak and who can come back, but y'all disappear. So
no, that's right.
It's a hard thing. So we don't have the education in these neighborhoods to properly say, okay, this is the problem, this is what you need to know. We don't have nobody talking about Mansa Musa in the hood. Like, that's just not there. And they are the ones that are being affected. And then there's people like Ta-Nehisi that's in the Schomburg. So when they watch it, it's like, but you're not out on the field.
Right.
So I just want to know your thoughts on that.
So it goes back to the answer thank you so much for that question. It goes back to the answer about local organizing. That in the context of organizing around particular issues that affect the material conditions of folks in these neighborhoods, conscientization will happen, right? That a building of consciousness can happen in the organizing around particular issues. People, when I wrote Democracy in Black, I went to Ferguson. And I remember we went to this action. I was with Dupree and Dena, and a colleague of mine, Josh Guile, and it was an action where Vonderit had been killed. And this young brother came out, and he was tatted up here, and he tatted up here, and he was saying, I'm not afraid of any set, but that's not my issue. But when I have to leave late at night to go to the convenience store down the street, I wake up my daughter so that if the police stop me, they won't kill me. Right. And then there's another brother, he had his scully on, he was all tatted up too, and he was trying to organize. He said, we're gonna do this thing, we're gonna march through this community, and we're gonna let them know we're here. And then he started drawing on all of this stuff that didn't quite fit to try to account for the condition of Black people. But you could see that he was thinking and he was trying to organize. And then they were marching and they had the big, the bullhorns, and the helicopters start coming. And they were like, FTP, fuck the police. FTP, fuck the police. And I'm walking behind them, and they're smoking that loud. And I'm getting, for those of you who don't know what loud is, it's a particular herb, it's a particular kind of weed. Right, but they were smoking, and I was getting the contact. I was like, this is not your Al Sharpton typical kind of march. This was very different, but they were making a point. Hold up. They were making a point. And so it was in that moment that I had to write about it. And I had to write about it in such a way that I could have a conversation with the brother who was actually organizing, right? And so what I've done what I've experienced over the course of the 2 years since Democracy in Black has come out, is I've experienced organizers and activists who have read the book, who have taken it back to their communities, right, in order to give languages or vocabularies to the people who are actually organizing, right? And I myself find myself in these communities, but you got to stay in your lane too. You don't want to try to be something that you're not, right? And try to act. I know where my lane is, and I don't want to be something and get in the way of somebody else who actually is better at doing that than I am. The question is, how do we build the connections, right, and overcome the gaps? And the first thing we have to do is to respect the organizing that is happening in those communities and lift them up and create the kind of spaces so they could be heard and seen and understood. Oftentimes, people like me, when those moments happen, whether it's in Baltimore or Ferguson or whether it's in Oakland, people like me want to jump in front and then get in front of the camera and then represent the folks who are actually putting their bodies on the line. Or we helicopter in.
Yeah, and that was the disconnect.
And then we want to just represent what's happening. We have no organic relation to the community that's actually experiencing the hell. And I don't want to do that because I'm a firm believer that we're the leaders we've been looking for. I want to create the conditions under which everyday ordinary people in their spaces can imagine themselves as the folk who are going to transform their own circumstances. How do I create the conditions under which, right, how do I help create the conditions under which that can happen without being condescending? Right? Without thinking that somebody whose subjects and verbs are fighting or somehow not being articulate about the conditions that they're addressing and they're organizing. That's a hard thing to do because you have to break the model of a certain kind of understanding of black leadership. You have to break it. And that's why if you ever get a chance, encounter Sister Ella Baker. Read Barbara Ramsby's book on Sister Ella Baker, and you get a very different understanding of how you ought to orient yourself to organize.
Thank you.
Yes, Doc?
Yes, how are you? Thank you for coming, Dr. Glaude. I'm also a Morehouse man too, class of 2011.
That's right, Doc.
Shout out to the house. So what I kind of wanted you to clarify was what you said in regards to brokenness.
Yeah.
It kind of rang a buzzer for me, and it made me think about Black love. And it also made me think about Dr. Cornel West, because me personally, I kind of drew the line from what you said about his traumatic experience as a child, and aligned it with his response to Ta-Nehisi Coates and Barack Obama. And it made me curious of his, not so much his criticism for Ta-Nehisi Coates and Barack Obama, but more so where it came from. And it made me ask, why was his traumatic experience as a child traumatic? And the conclusion that I came to was he gave the power of his worth to those white people that got out the pool. When they got out the pool and drained the water, I'm assuming that he interpreted that as, I'm not worthy of their acceptance, therefore I'm not worthy, as opposed to saying, I am worthy. Me being in this pool without their water and without them is better than them being in this pool with me. But if he interpreted the way I mentioned before, if he wanted their acceptance, it makes me think, well, is that the reason why he feels the need to criticize any black person that is accepted by these white people, such as Barack Obama or Ta-Nehisi Coates? And if that is the case, then isn't that healing necessary, that healing of that brokenness, which will lead him to black love, which would make all the things that you say possible, which would make black nationalism possible, and which would make a paradise possible, not just for black people, but for humanity?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, you know, it's always good to see another Morehouse man in these spaces. So I brought up the moment of Dr. West in the pool as an example of the immediacy of a certain kind of wounding, that it wasn't in some distant past, that people who are walking around, right, they've experienced, or my own father, they've experienced the impact, the effects of racism, and they've experienced it intimately. Now, Brother West will tell you that he also experienced profound black love in his church, the place where Sly Stone played the organ. His pastor, his mother, his father, the community that made him who he is. And so that experience was used as an example of the way I'm doing it, not to kind of say that he was irreparably marked by that such that he needed or required the recognition of white people in order to exist, but rather to give an example, among others, of that racism isn't in the distant past, that these folk are here. Mm-hmm. I think, to my mind, Cornel West's criticism of Barack Obama is actually consistent with his message. Before the inauguration and the quote-unquote controversy around the tickets, Professor West, at a panel that Roland Martin was chairing, said, this is before the inauguration, that he's going to hold that brother accountable. That unless he came in with a particular kind of political orientation, he would actually contribute to, I'm paraphrasing here, he would contribute to making the mess bigger, and that he was going to hold that brother accountable. And so what you see over the course of his criticism of Obama is in some ways a difference in politics, and in some ways his own sense that he went out on the campaign trail 65 times for this dude. So his own sense of atonement in relation to his own participation in getting him elected. So there's the critique of the actual politics in terms of the drones. There's a critique of the actual politics in terms of Goldman Sachs and the Department of Treasury. There's a critique of the politics that actually are tied to the appointment of Rahm Emanuel as the chief of staff, right? What Obama did when he got in. And what he did was he showed that he's nothing but Clinton in blackface. That's what I think West saw, and that's what I believe. And then the critique to Coates. Now, and I used to say to Cornell all the time, right, why you got to be so shrill? He said, it's not a time for niceties. So it's almost, and I said this as I was traveling the country, if we are on a bus and the bus is going over the hill and the brakes is given out and the steering wheel is locked, and you got black folk in the bus and they're not screaming from the top of their lungs that we're about to go over the hill, then they're part of the problem. If you're not screaming from the top of your lungs, we're about to go over this hill because you're too busy excited about getting your ticket to the White House. You're too busy, right, trying to be among the folk who are getting invited to hang out with the Obamas. You want to be included in that circle because you done made it. You're too busy being excited about being welcomed right there. Then your voice suddenly, you lose your vocal cords. And you're not speaking of what's happening to black people all around the country because you're getting your invitation to the White House. Then to my mind, you deserve to get called out in every way, shape, form, or fashion. Now with Coates, it's a different thing. It's a different thing. Now I don't engage in the kind of criticism that Dr. West, I do it in a different way, but I hold the same view, right? And so, but we want to come out of this. Let me say this, and I don't want to end on a negative note. This kind of debate is healthy if it's coming from the right space. If it's not coming from the right place, then it's just one person trying to assert his brand or her brand over another person. The one thing I do know is this. I don't care about who's considered the best black intellectual or the most powerful black intellectual or who's thought of as this black leader or that. Only thing I know is that we suffering, man. That black people are catching hell. And I'm tired of people playing games with that. We're catching hell, and the future isn't bright. The long-term indicators aren't bright. And so it's one thing to celebrate somebody getting theirs. It's one thing to be celebratory of somebody who's getting paid in this moment because the moment is so dark. But it's another thing to want to keep track of the suffering. To keep track of the suffering. And I think at the end of the day, that's what matters. That's what matters. So whether you think West is doing that or not is on you. I think that's what motivates him. In fact, I know that's what motivates him. But it is what it is until it ain't. Thanks.
Everyone, please give a round of applause. Thank you so much, Dr. Glaude. That was incredible and powerful.
Thank you again. Oh, thank you.
Now, I know some of... I'm hoping we can keep them sit around to sign some books.
Sure.
Is that cool?
Sure.
We can do it here, in here. So if you want your book signed, come on down while you still have time.
Hold on, we have to take our Snapchat first.
Okay.
You know we have to take the Snapchat. You know you gotta hit the Millie Rock. You gotta hit the Millie Rock. Hey, hey, hey.
Come on down if you want to get your book signed, guys.
Just say hey.
Hello.
For everyone else who's
We had an
leaving,
amazing
enjoy your
time.
week. I will see you next
Amazing time,
week.
And you're brilliant.
Thank you.
Come up. Come up. You could come on stage, guys.
Thank you. I had a lot of them. You got your book? Huh? You want me to sign?
I didn't have my book. I didn't bring it. It's in my crib.
You gonna take a picture? Something?
I gotta go get these nails done.
Oh, okay. See you next Saturday.